What's the difference between Last Exit and So This Is Goodbye?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's funny because Last Exit, when we did it, it took a really long time to make that record, and a lot of those songs are really old for me. Like they were written a really long time ago. So This Is Goodbye came together much more cohesively as a sort of whole album, and there was sort of more of a, I don't want to say it was a concept album because it's not, but there was much more of a unifying theme behind the whole album, and to me it seems more cohesive that way. And whereas Last Exit is sort of just a collection of a whole bunch of songs that were written, and they're written by different people. Like, I mean, I was doing stuff with another person, and then there was stuff that I did by myself, and then Matt came at the end of that process, and so there's some sort of disjointed elements in that. But So This Is Goodbye for me is a much more sort of cohesive thing there, where from one song to the next, to me at least anyway, it kind of makes sense,
Listening to that today, is it going back in your time in the city of Hamilton?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't listen to either of those albums. I'm just so sick of both of them. But I mean, yeah, I think that's a nice thing about making an album, I suppose, is that in the future, not now because I haven't had enough distance from them, but in the future, presumably, I'll be able to go back and listen to the records. And I suppose they'll probably tell me something a little bit about where I was at, or what I was going through, or what I was thinking about at the time. But I'm gonna have to wait a long time before I do that, because at the moment there's no way I'd put those records on.
Why did the chemistry between the two of you work well? I mean, like you came in the end of the Last Exit, or just before release.
Well, we've worked on music together for so long. I mean, it didn't even seem like a leap or anything. Like, it just sort of happened. So we've been doing music together since we were teenagers, albeit very bad music at that time. But
tell us.
Well, we had attempts at making everything from space rock to house music to really terrible drum and bass. So I mean, we were teenagers trying to figure out what we were doing. But yeah, I mean.
Who came up with the worst ideas?
I think it was we're probably head for a head.
Me, I should think. I always come up with bad ideas. Matt's good at that. Matt's good at like telling me not to. I remember not even that long ago, I was like, I want to do some bossa nova something, and he was like, no, that's just not going to happen. I think that was probably a good call.
You only get good ideas out of bad ones. Like, if your ideas are too good, then it's too safe. You got to have some bad decisions in order to get good ones, I think.
Yeah. But finding your own style isn't always the easiest thing. I mean, like, that takes some time.
I think we were lucky in the sense that we come from a fairly small town. I mean, it's not that small, but I mean, it's quite a big city actually by Canadians.
Familiar.
Yeah, by Canadian standards, it's quite a big city, but it's an isolated place. It's not a cool city. It's not a cosmopolitan city. And, we're lucky enough that we never felt as though we had to, at least with Junior Boys, we never really felt like, we really want to fit into some scene or into some kind of music community that means something to us. The idea was always just to try and experiment and then come up with something. And I think there was some kind of formula clicked at some point where we just sort of felt like, okay, well, we have some kind of vision as to what we want to sound like and what kind of ideas we want to put across. And I felt, at least at the time, that it didn't really sound like anything else in particular. And that's what got me really excited about doing the band, because I felt, this sounds kind of new, which is something that I think every band should feel about themselves. I mean, every band is also filled with tons of self-doubt and stuff like that, but I mean, you have to have some confidence about what you do, and I think ours comes from the fact that I think that we don't particularly feel like we fit in anywhere in particular, and I think that's what keeps things sort of exciting for us.
How can you describe that vision and that formula?
I think you have to sort of keep some sort of distance from what you're doing. You can't be like, I mean, neither of us have like a huge personal involvement with the music to the point where it's like, it would destroy us if someone didn't like it. I mean, you just sort of have to, you make an idea and you sort of go for it, and then sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think,
I think that's right. I mean, I think basically making music, you can't. I think often with making music, if you take every song and every creative idea too seriously, then you're going to have problems, because ultimately only 1 out of every 10 ideas that you have is going to be good. So you have to be able to do a lot of self-editing and so forth. And as for ideas and like how do you describe what your formula is and stuff like that, I think anytime you're capable of doing that is probably a bad sign. If you know exactly what... Basically, I always... it's frustrating for interviewers. They'll say, oh, what do you guys sound like? Or how would you describe the Junior Boys? Or something like that. And I would sort of say, well, I don't. I don't know how to do that. And that's because I don't spend too much time thinking about it. And if I did spend too much time thinking about it, I think that kind of self-consciousness would probably ruin the music, to be honest.
How do you work when you're doing music? Is it something that is an ongoing progress even though you're on tour, or is it something that happens basically?
No, we don't write music while we're on tour. Just because it's just too hard, and also because we're the kind of band that relies too much on equipment. There's bands out there who can essentially just write music with the equipment they tour with, on an acoustic guitar maybe, or on an electric guitar or something like that. But our music sort of kind of evolves out of playing around with sort of studio gear and stuff like that, and all of that has to be sort of set up, and the conditions have to be right in order to let that happen and so forth. So it means that we sort of have to set aside time to do it, but and again, with the formula thing, we don't have any real rules as to how we write music or who takes on what responsibility or anything like that. Everything happens much more sort of organically. So it's difficult to describe,
I think it's going to be very exciting to hear what's coming next, because of when I've seen, I haven't seen you on stage yet, but I've seen clips on the internet. There's a great show from Amsterdam. And where you can have the image of how you are live. What do you think? What will you take something from that experience of being that band sort of a thing and bring that into the next session to the recording?
I'm sort of hesitant to say yes, only because I do sort of think of us very much as a studio band, But I can't help but, even with this last album, there was times in my head where I was thinking, how are we going to approach this live, and how is that going to work? So anytime you're even thinking, even cognizant of that, then it has some effect on it. And I think to some extent, the way we do things live has some effect on what we do in the studio. But ultimately, I think all of the major decisions are made in a studio setting, and like I said, we're the kind of band that is so reliant on our equipment, so involved in all of the things that it can do, that oftentimes we're sort of not even really that aware of what a thing's going to sound like until we fiddle. It's kind of like writing music is kind of like playing a video game or something. You just fiddle around until something sounds right.